In this segment of our state legislative trainings, we're going to talk about how to engage. And this is where I get really excited and what really motivates me in state work. And that is that constituents, so residents of the state, have so much sway and ability to actually change laws in your state, so much more than Congress, right? So don't get me wrong, everything happening in Congress is super important and really affects us. However, what's happening at the state level in your state is far more likely to impact your day-to-day life as raising your family or whatever you may be doing than what's happening in Congress. And what's exciting about that, and also alarming, and the reason that you need to be vigilant about what's happening in your state, is that any citizen can help bring an idea to become a law. And while, yes, in theory, that happens in Congress, what usually happens in Congress is that think tanks, bureaucrats, agencies, huge organizations, financial interests, businesses, corporations, etc., are the people often bringing the ideas to members of Congress and have a lot more of a role in helping to shape those laws than just an everyday Joe, right? So it's really exciting that you can have such a role in shaping your state laws, but it's important to know how to engage. So let's start there. Firstly, how the heck do you find out who your state rep is, who your state senator is, and how to get in touch with them? Again, this looks different in every state, but what is consistent is that every state has a legislative website. And on your legislative website, you can find your legislator. And you will have two, because unless you live in Nebraska, you will have two. And every person has a state rep and a state senator. So the state representative districts are smaller. They are more centralized to probably where you live, like where your house is actually located, where a state senator has a region. So they typically have several towns or counties within their region, where a state rep maybe just be one town or county, or even a part of a town or county. So it's important to know. So your representation goes off your address where you live. It does not go off of the town you live in, for example. First, you have to find out who represents you. Then you have to find out how to contact them. So the first thing you want to do is go to your legislative website. And in this case, we're going to go to my state of Montana. We're going to go to find your legislator, going to put in my address, and it's going to bring up my districts. In your state, you'll want to do something similar to find out who represents you. Once you find your legislature, you want to find out how to contact them. And again, this is where it's really going to look different state to state. What's super interesting is that in some states, like mine in Montana, some legislators literally list their personal cell phone and their personal Gmail on the legislative directory. So we are in such a small state with small population, and we also meet once every 2 years, that there's a lot more access to your legislator, but also they're getting less frequent calls. Whereas in a state like Massachusetts, for example, your legislator is full-time and they have an entire staff that help them. So this is another important nuance from state to state. Some states, the rep literally does everything, right? They don't have help. They are bringing the bill forward and they're working directly with the drafters in the state to draft those bills. In other states, there's an entire staff. There is a legislative aide, a communications director, a chief of staff, a policy director that are helping the member, and the member being the elected official, decide what they want to bring, how to draft it, etc. In many states, and the way most states typically work, there's a caucus staff. And the caucus staff is partisan. So you have a Republican caucus and a Democrat caucus. And the caucus staff may have multiple aides that are split up among several members, like an aide per 3 members or something like that. But then there's like one general counsel that's drafting all the bills. There's a policy director and a communications director helping them get media on all their bills. So again, this looks very different from state to state. But what is most important is to go to your state legislative website, find your members. Often their contact information is listed right there. Call them or email them. I have yet to not hear back, right? So you usually always hear back, especially if you're a constituent. And it's important to say that I live in this town, blah, blah, blah. And just get on the phone with them or try to express your problem. And then you'll be put in touch with the right person. So finding their contact for your member is what's most important. And that can always be done through your legislative website. So that's the best resource to go to. I would avoid going to third-party websites. Then you want to figure out, how do you engage in this legislature? So if you're just trying to raise a concern or an idea with a member, contact them, share your concern or idea. You can always do that through email too. That is often how Independent Women Network action centers work. So our action centers essentially are a hub where we have already formulated an argument for you, pro or against an issue or a bill, for example, that has a pre-form letter that you can then submit. And you literally just have to put in your information and hit submit, and it will send it out based on your address to the right people. That is a really useful and powerful tool. However, let's say we have 100 people take action on XYZ bill, and it's all going to these legislators. They're going to start to see that there's a pattern in the form email, right? It is the same subject, same email coming through time after time. They should be logging all those concerns, and I would assume they are. However, they will take it less seriously than a customized letter or email to a member. So when you have the ability to write your own email with your own personal touch to it and your own argument or personal experience, that is always received better, because it is really, it seems like you took time to do it and it's a real person, right? It's not some kind of robotic form letter coming through. So action centers are an excellent place to engage, and they're a good first step forward to dip your toe into legislative action, whether it be at the congressional level or the state level. But when you have the comfort, when you're comfortable enough to either call a legislator and talk to them, which is the best thing you can do, that would be my number one choice. You will find out how quickly that these people are humans, and you can have real conversations with them, and you can actually help sway them in the direction that you're fighting for, depending on how amenable they are to that idea. So calling is always best. But the second would be email, and just writing your own email and being concerned and really sharing your concern about it. What I would avoid doing, but you can absolutely do, is mail, physical mail to these members, just because they're in the building, but the mail process is hard. Then it has to be vetted, etc. So it can take a lot longer. So it's much better to, number one, pick up the phone, number two, email, number three, mail. There's a 1A, that would be the best possible case scenario, and that is that you actually meet with your elected official in your community in real life. And this is not as rare as it sounds. A lot of legislators will do office hours at a library or at a public location where they have an open forum, essentially, where you can show up and have a cup of coffee with them and talk to them about something. Also, a lot of state legislators will just meet with you. If you say, hey, I want to meet at this coffee shop and I want to talk about this bill, and they usually will. So it is really good to reach out to these people, as the first step to get engaged. If you're really looking to have a conversation, understand where they're coming from, help them understand you. What I would avoid doing in that situation is going in knowing you're going to be confrontational. This is not the place to be confrontational in a rude or aggressive way. One, because that's not good to do with anybody. But number two, you're going to quickly lose trust of the legislature, and the legislators are going to lose trust of working with you. So the best thing to do is to build trust and to build real rapport with your members, so that when they call and they hear, oh, Jordan Kemper called about the Stand With Women Act again, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I met with her, and actually that's great. She works with Independent Women's Forum and Voice, and she knows what she's talking about on this bill. Let's talk to her, right? So once they get to know you, they can start to build a rapport. Now, if you're just calling for the first time and trying to engage in the legislature, you might just want to voice your concern on a phone call or email and let that be done. You've wiped your hands, you've done your job, you've expressed your interest. And that's good too, right? That is good. Those concerns are logged by constituent services or the member themselves, depending on what kind of staffing they have. And it's an excellent way to get involved. So a few brief ways, just to recap, because there's a lot you can do before we move into testimony, which is its own beast. You can talk to your legislator, find their contact, go on your state legislative website, find who represents you, find their contact information, reach out, introduce yourself. You might find out they're your neighbor, literally. So it's good for you to know who these people are. Then what you want to do is start to build a rapport with them. around a particular bill or interest. I'm not telling you to become besties with your state rep unless you want to. That's great. Just for the heck of it, because they also have lives and you don't want to waste their time. However, when it is legislative session and there's a bill you're fighting for or against, or an idea you have, or an issue that you want to see become law, then that is the first step. You want to start to build a rapport with them. And sometimes it's building a rapport with their staff, right? If they are full-time and they have big legislative priorities and they're on a lot of committees and they're having to travel, or like in my state, the districts are huge and, you might have to go 150 miles from front to end of your district. They're busy people. And especially if session is short and it's not year round, then they're super busy because they're trying to cram it all into a few months. So it's important to also get to know who their staff are if they have staff and build a rapport with them. Often the staff are the ones that are really driving action too, or helping these members prioritize who they need to talk to, what they need to get back on, and what bills they want to bring forward. So always personal touch. I mean, I'm just a big believer in personal touch anyways. I still write thank you notes and things like that. But the thing is, the more personal, the better your results will be in actually having impact. So we've become such an automized, computerized society that everything is a form letter, automatic, etc. And there's a time and place for that, like our action centers that are super helpful and an incredibly useful tool. However, they're just one tool, and it doesn't mean they're the best tool, right? So the best tool will always be personal touch. If these legislators know you, they know who you are, they know your kids, they go to your school, blah, 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 they are much more likely to be persuaded by you than an outside group sending letters or, a mass petition or something like that. But I want to come back to petitions because those are also very useful tools. So personal touch is number one. Find out who represents you, find out how to get in touch with them, and reach out. The second thing would be using a service that can help you do that. And so, for example, that is our action centers, right? Or our Women's Bill of Rights Declaration, which is a petition. And I want to give you an example of how impactful that has been. State legislators, unlike Congress, are alarmed when they receive 3 phone calls on the same bill, okay? In Congress, they need to receive probably 100 plus before the red flags go up. They're like, oh, I should pay attention to this. It's on my radar. So if you and your family and your friends reach out on a bill and you can get 5 or 6 people to do that, you are likely to get a seat at the table to talk to this person. So small amounts of interest in a bill can have a huge persuasion effect on members. And this is where form letters, petitions can be very impactful at the state level. Now, personal always supersedes because it's personal, right? That's not something we need to explain. It's just obvious. But when a member is hearing from multiple people on the same issue, they start to realize, oh, baby, this is on my constituents' radars. And by the way, my constituents are my voters, and I need their vote to win again. So at the end of the day, people run for office to be elected officials, and they want to be elected again. So when you make noise, either supporting them or opposing them, they're going to pay attention. So get your friends to do the same and take action through things like action centers or signing a Women's Bill of Rights Declaration or a petition of sorts that can make a lot of noise. We always like to say, like, mass moves mass, right? Well, it's the same thing. A mass number of people can move massive change. And so it is important that we get lots of people engaged in things like action centers, and they're a great tool on Independent Women's Network, but also petitions. And here's an example. When we had our veto override session in Kansas in 2023, we had 100 and something, I'm forgetting the exact number. I want to say it was like 154 people who had signed our Women's Bill of Rights Declaration. And what we were able to do is create a booklet of those names of constituents who publicly signed. They signed to have their name publicly attached to this thing, and hand deliver it to these members who were reluctant to support our bill. When you get 100 and plus people saying that are your constituents saying, hey, I don't want you to do this, or I do want you to do this, again, they pay attention. And oftentimes, because we're talking about state work, which, yay, it's so exciting. It's so exciting because there's personal relationships. They see that, oh my gosh, this person's address is 3 doors down from mine. And oh, that's who that is? Their kid goes to school with my kid. And the names are familiar. The addresses are familiar. The people are real people. This is not some hypothetical thing that a congressman is reading in DC while you're out in your home. These are your neighbors. And that is the most important thing to remember. It is always important to respect our state legislators. They are elected officials, and that's always important. But remember that these are your peers. You elected them, and they're your peers. They are not untouchables, and it is important to engage with them. So, ways to engage: personal contact, sign petitions that are relevant to that state bill, right? Fill out action centers that are relevant to that state bill. Things to avoid. What I would avoid are sending your state legislator massive national appeals of sorts, right? What we really want to do is personalize it to what they are working on. So you want it to be relevant to a bill that they're working on, not necessarily a hypothetical idea that is being discussed in the legislature. That's not bad, but I say avoid it because I don't think it's going to help you achieve the outcome that you're looking for. So when you're using your time, which is also precious, and we're all working and doing things and busy, you want to make sure you're maximizing your impact. And so I would use things that are relevant to the bill or a topic being discussed in the legislature, and something that is relevant to your state, not necessarily what's happening in other states. That brings us to the last big thing. Well, there's 2 other big things that you can do. One is social media. And so I would just say apply everything we just discussed: personal, outreach, respectful, relevant to the bill, or if it's not yet a bill, relevant to the idea or the concept. And post about it, right? You can post about these things. You can tag in your members. You can apply pressure through social pressure. And so social media is a great tool with state legislators. Again, I have worked with many that are reading these forums. They're looking on Facebook. They're looking on X. They're seeing what you post. And they are alarmed if they start to see many people tagging the same thing. So, it's important to use social media. And everything that we talked about in this last part applies to social media. Many of those same tactics are going to apply to testimony, but testimony is a bit of an art. And so let's talk about it. When you deliver state testimony, you are publicly attaching your name to a public record. These are often recorded meetings, or if you're sending in written testimony, it lives in perpetuity attached to that bill. For the sake of yourself, always be respectful. There is no reason to be disrespectful to legislators. It is always important to be respectful. It will help you get far in life. These are tried and true values that we want to have morals, right? So respect is the most important thing. This is not the time to air all your grievances in an angry way, right? You want to be measured in your testimony. It is okay to have grievances. And in fact, most testimony is most effective when we do have a grievance of some sort. But you want it to be personal to you or personal to some experience you've had with it. And you want it to be rooted in a solution. And so when you deliver testimony, there's essentially a little formula. And any one of us at Independent Women will help you with this if you're interested, but particularly the State Affairs team can be helpful. But the formula is essentially the following. There's a bill. So this means it's received a public hearing. That's the only way to give testimony. So it's received a public hearing. You have a bill number, you have a bill name. You know the committee it's before. So there's a few little due diligences you have to do beforehand. 1, what committee is it before and who is the chairperson? You want to address the committee. So dear House, or you don't need to say dear, but House Judiciary Committee. Dear Mr. Chairman and members of the House Judiciary Committee, for example. You want to address the committee that you are speaking before first. That's your opening line. Think of a letter format. Next, I ask you to support House Bill XYZ. Or, I urge you to reject House Bill XYZ. So you want to start your testimony with an opening statement about a proponent or an opponent of the bill. In some states, you can be neutral, but in most states, you do need to choose a position. So you want to do that. Then you want to share your testimony, right? Testimony is exactly what it says it is. It is a testimonial of your reason for speaking on it. So maybe you're an expert in the field that it affects, or maybe you're a person with maybe you're a parent who has had a personal experience of a child that you're speaking for, or maybe it's your personal experience. But when we give testimony, you address the committee, you share if you're a proponent or an opponent, and then you give your testimonial. So you share why you're a proponent or an opponent of that bill. It is in this part, and this is the meat of your testimony, that you want to be very cautious to not do any personal attacks on members, to not personally attack the idea, but rather keep it factual and emotional. It can absolutely be emotional. In fact, emotion is some of the best medicine to affect change. But what we want to make sure is that it's just rooted in truth. Again, these are lasting records. You do not want to lie. You should never lie, but you certainly don't want to lie in testimony. You do not want to be disparaging of any members. You do not want to do any personal attacks. In many states, they'll immediately kick you out of the committee anyways if you do that. But always keep it factual and keep it true to your experience. You can cite experiences of other people that are public. This is where IW features can be such a valuable resource to you. You can see if there's been any egregious things that have happened to, for example, females in your state. Like, let's say you're dealing with a prison bill and you are dealing in California. We have a tremendous archive of horrific stories of what female inmates have endured in California prisons. You could cite those because they're relevant to your state. So again, you can use tools if you're in favor or opposing a bill. You can use tools that aren't necessarily personal to you, but you want them to have a personal tie to your state. And that's important. So you want to keep everything personal. And this is a common theme you've heard throughout this entire course, which is that you want it to be personal and through personal experience and testimonials, and you can have personal impact, right? So you can personally impact the bill and the bill can impact you personally. That is why state work is so important that we tune into and we know what's going on, but also because it affects your life so much more. So when you're giving testimony, address the committee, share what side of the bill you're on, give your personal testimonial or tie in facts that are personal, and then close it again, thanking the committee for the opportunity to share your testimony and your final ask. So I urge you to vote yay on House Bill XYZ. I urge you to vote nay on House Bill XYZ. In rare circumstances, and I would only recommend doing this really if you have an expertise on the issue, you can also ask them to amend the bill. So you can, in your public testimony, say, I support this concept, but I ask you to amend this language because of X, Y, and Z. Again, that's a rare thing that you'll hear in testimony, but you do hear it from experts in the field. So if you are an expert in your field and you want to support a bill, that is an opportunity, if you think there's a way to make it better, to express how you would amend the bill. And sometimes they'll take those amendments and they'll actually work with you on the language for the amendment, etc. So the committee process is an exciting process. It is an excellent way to engage with your state legislature. And it's also a very powerful way that you can share your testimony. Everything I just recited is what I was referring to for testimony in general. So this can be a recipe for written testimony or verbal testimony, meaning you are there in person or zooming in doing virtual testimony to read a testimony. The main thing to know is what is the time limit on your testimony. In most states, it is like 2 to 3 minutes. However, in some states, there's a word limit on written testimony, 500 or 1,000 words. And in some states, there's no limit at all. So make sure you check on testimony limits. You can find that out through the clerk or the committee. So you can call the clerk and just ask them what's the testimony limit, time limit for delivering testimony. Or if you're working with your legislator and good, talking to them about the bill, or they know you're coming, certainly you can also ask them how long you should prepare testimony for. So testimony is an excellent way to get involved. So just to recap some ways that you can engage with your legislature: personal touch, reach out to them, find your state legislator first, reach out to them, get to know their staff if they have staff. If you want to become very involved in legislature, that is not at all something you have to do, but that's a good thing to know if you're going to be very involved. Use our action centers, use IW Features, which is a storytelling hub of real life circumstances on various issues that you might be testifying on, and then engage on social media and deliver testimony. So there are several ways that you can engage in your state legislature to be an impactful, engaged citizen, and we encourage you to do it.